Hello, everybody. Welcome into Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today, we have a lot to talk about. There wasn't a lot of live events yesterday. There was, though, a hockey game. We will get to that in a little bit. We're going to start our show off in the NFL, though. We're going to talk about some wide receiver market stuff as Jaylen Waddle gets an extension just a couple days after Nico Collins gets an extension. We'll talk about how that market is on the brink of an explosion with so many big players up for a deal. We'll also talk about some basketball and some baseball. Baseball, we're going to talk about the Jorge Lopez situation that occurred last night. He got cut from the Mets, or DFA'd. Not officially cut yet, but most likely that's what's going to happen. We'll talk about the interesting situation that led up to that. We're also going to talk about the Negro League stats that got introduced into the history books of the MLB, replacing a lot of all-time leaders. So we'll talk about that as well. And in the NBA, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the coaching updates that have been going on around the league. But before, like I said, we're going to start off in the NFL. But before we get into that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Leave a tip or donation with a message in it. That message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. I do appreciate anything you do give. If you have a burning question about sports, anything at all, go ahead and leave a comment. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. Once again, that link is gsmcpodcast.net. And I appreciate all of you for sticking around and talking some sports with me on a beautiful Tuesday afternoon. But like I was saying, we are going to start off our show in the NFL with what might seem like a cut and dry question: is the wide receiver market about to explode? And if you're just looking at it from the angle, the answer is probably yes. And that is most likely what is going to happen. There are some counter arguments saying, hey, there's so many great wide receivers coming into the league nowadays, you don't need to pay them. Look at what the Chiefs did. But not everybody has Patrick Mahomes. You have Justin Jefferson up for contract, who is that entire Vikings offense. You have Jamar Chase up for contract. You have CeeDee Lamb up for contract. What happens to all of these teams? And throw in T. Higgins for that matter. You know, there's so many great players, great wide receivers that are up for contracts, and we're seeing Amon-Ra just got paid. He's now the highest paid. Nico Collins, like I said in the intro, we talked about it a couple days ago. He just got paid. Just today, this morning, Jaylen Waddle gets a $84 million extension, making him the fourth highest paid wide receiver in the league. And is he really the fourth best wide receiver in the league? No. And I don't think anybody is arguing that he is the fourth best wide receiver in the league, but everybody does understand that to a certain extent, you need to pay your receivers, especially when you're a team like Miami, where Tua is your quarterback. If you don't have those receivers, and again, nothing against Tua, I think he's a fine quarterback, but he's not a franchise-changing quarterback. He's not a guy that you can throw out there with no weapons and he'll succeed. He needs those weapons, and Miami has done an incredible job of building those weapons around him. You know, Tyreek Hill has been a game changer. Jaylen Waddle has been a game changer. The speed that they have around him, you know, the running backs, Devon Achane, Raheem Mostert, all these guys that Miami has built around Tua have been huge for him, and keeping that band together is what's going to keep them successful. They have a lot of money to hand out. It's very important that they keep the gang together, and they've been able to do that very, very successfully. The other side of this coin is how high is this market going to go before it bursts? Because there is going to be a tipping point. We're kind of sort of seeing that with quarterbacks at 60 million seems to be that number. There is a hesitation from a lot of organizations to give just blindly, oh, it's your turn, we're going to reset the market for these quarterbacks at 60 million. You saw some quarterbacks sign for less than Joe Burrow. They're not top of the league quarterbacks. You don't expect them to, but Jared Goff, who could have commanded, who did in the past command resetting of market money, get near resetting, but not resetting the market. We're going to see markets reset soon. I believe Trevor Lawrence is going to be the one to reset that market. We'll see what happens with Dak Prescott. Maybe he will. I get the feeling he won't, but we'll have to see what happens there. We're kind of starting to see a hesitancy, and I don't think that number is going to be at 60 million for quarterbacks, but we saw it with running backs too. They kind of hit a ceiling, and people are like, hey, let's go back down. And I know that's how the game is evolving. Running backs are becoming less and less important as time goes on. But there is a lot of stuff going on that can affect exactly how the money works in a league like the NFL, right? And I think soon we're going to start to see it in the wide receiver market. These wide receivers, Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, Jamar Chase, and others that are on the market now, ready to get their first big contract, are going to make more than $30 million. Right now, the money, I believe, is under $30 million. They're gonna be over 30. Maybe they get to 40. Who knows? I'm not in these discussions. But when you start to creep up into quarterback territory, that $40 million, that $50 million, when is that going to cap out? And I think we're going to start to see that number cap out for wide receivers. Again, a better way to look at it rather than just straight up money is percentage of the cap. And right now the cap is around 250. If you get to a point where, your quarterback makes 25% of the cap and your wide receiver also makes 25% of the cap, or 20%. That's kind of ridiculous. I feel like 50 million is going to be that number that wide receivers are going to try and break, at least for today's numbers. So we'll say 20% of the cap. That's going to be too much for a wide receiver. I think if you sit a wide receiver down at around, 25 million right now, so that's about 10% of the cap as we sit, I think that's a good number. I think they can get it up to 15. Get it up to 37. I think that's about the limit. Maybe 20, but 20 is kind of pushing it, and that's the elite number that they're going to get, But once you start asking for 25, they're going to look at their teams, and they're going to say, hey, that's a fourth of our cap that's going to this one guy, and he's not even the quarterback, It's going to be really hard to build the other 51 people in that roster if you're paying a wide receiver that much. Now, the market is about to explode. This is a problem that's not going to start to pop up for another 5-10 years probably. But it is something that we might be able to see. Again, every single sport is a wave. It comes and it goes as far as trends. Right now we're in a passing league where offenses are dominating. Soon defenses are going to start to dominate. I don't know when that wave is going to come, but it will eventually. And at that point, we're going to start to see defenses get paid more. That's just how it goes. Every single sport, it always evolves. It always changes, ebbs and flows. But right now, I'm excited for this wide receiver market. We have a wide receiver renaissance right now, and wide receivers are starting to get paid like the second most important position on offense, which everyone always overlooks the offensive line. That's the most important position. You can talk about a quarterback, but if a quarterback has no time to do anything, it doesn't matter how good they are. So I think even offensive linemen might be a little more important. But they're not getting that kind of money. They're not a flashy position. We are looking at the beginning of an explosion in the wide receiver market that kind of happened with quarterbacks around 2012-ish, when they started getting paid these ridiculous, huge sums of money. And again, a much healthier way to look at this and see how it's grown is to look at the cap percentage that these players are getting. But we can just see that it grows, and that's because the NFL is getting more and more money. So I'm excited to see how big the wide receiver market gets to. I think the maximum it'll get to, if we just go by today's standards, cap being 250, is somewhere around the equivalent of what would be $45 million for one guy, which is kind of crazy. And I don't think it's going to get there yet. I think Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, Jamar Chase, they're going to sign for around 30 to 35, somewhere in that range. But the next wave, we're going to start to see increase and increase and increase. So I'm curious to see how high it gets. Let me know what you think in the comments below. We are going to transition out of the NFL here in just a second and talk a little bit about a situation that happened in the MLB last night with a Mets reliever, Jorge Lopez. It's a interesting situation. There's a lot of different angles to cover on that, so we will get to that in just 1 second. That is coming up next on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Give me a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around, I feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up in the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out over 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get my way and to be put down. It ain't replaced, I'll get my time. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the losing fits, I'm losing shit. And stupid myth, you choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh. Please, Lord, give me a sign.
Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today, if you were just tuning in, we just finished talking a little bit about the impending explosion of the wide receiver market, including Jaylen Waddle getting a new $84 million extension, making him the fourth highest paid wide receiver in the NFL currently. This coming off the heels just a couple days ago of the Texans giving Nico Collins a shiny new $72 million contract that puts him up there as well. And some of those big guys have not signed yet. But in this segment here, we are going to talk a little bit about the MLB. And this is a very interesting situation here, what's going on in the MLB with the Mets in particular and Jorge Lopez, with him being DFA'd or cut from his team. So we'll get to that in just a second. But before we do, remember, if you guys would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Leave a tip or donation with a message in it. That message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. I do appreciate everything you do give. If you have a burning question about sports, anything at all, go ahead and leave it in the comments. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. Like I said, I appreciate you guys sticking around and talking some sports with me on a beautiful Thursday afternoon. Getting my days all mixed up on you guys. But like I was saying, we're going to talk about the MLB today. A really interesting situation happened with Mets reliever Jorge Lopez. And I'm just going to give you the whole timeline of what happened. Jorge Lopez comes in against the Dodgers, gives up a home run to Shohei Ohtani, who is very good at baseball, in case you guys weren't aware of that. He's pretty good at what he does. He hits a home run, and one thing leads to another. The next batter, Freddie Freeman, there is a check swing, and on check swings, it's kind of a half swing. The rule is if the bat goes around more than 50%, then it counts as a swing and it's a strike, and if not, then it's a ball, or wherever the ball was. It happened to be a ball in this situation. So there was a peel down to the third base umpire, and the third base umpire says that he did not go. And looking at the video, I agree. I don't think it was a swing. That's regardless the point. That doesn't have anything to do with this, really. Jorge Lopez gets angry at the third base umpire, shouts something in his direction, and the third base umpire tosses him, which on its own is a very rare occurrence. 99.9% of the time, when there is an ejection in a baseball game, it's coming from the home plate umpire. The home plate umpire is the one getting in their face. He's the one that is the center of that umpiring crew, and I know they have captains and they rotate around, but generally you don't see the third base umpire being the one to throw somebody out. This gets Jorge Lopez very angry. He's not very happy about this. He is not a happy camper. He gets angry. He storms off the field after, more words are exchanged, as always, when someone is ejected in a baseball game, and he tosses his glove into the stand, which some people have an issue with. I understand it's not what you're supposed to do, but that part doesn't really bug me. And I know for some traditional baseball, hey, you're not allowed to show emotion, you're not allowed to get angry, you got ejected, don't throw your glove into the stand. It's a cool souvenir. I wish I was that Yankees fan that caught it. That would have been awesome. I would love to have a MLB glove. I'm not there, I'm not that guy, and I know it kind of is a bad look, quite honestly. But in the grand scheme of things, that in my opinion is not a big deal. He gets angry, he goes into the clubhouse. After the game, media is talking to him, he's doing a little interview, and an important part of this is that his second language is English. So his main language is Spanish, and he came over here to play baseball. He doesn't have a translator, which is kind of why this whole scandal is blowing up more than it would have. In an interview, they say, hey, do you regret your actions? And he says, no, I effing don't. I don't regret my actions. And he goes on for a little bit, and then he says, or what the media heard him say, was, I am on the worst effing team in the whole MLB. Now, that is the story that got run with, and that is what most likely led to him getting cut from the Mets. You can't really say that about your team. They asked for clarification. He said, yeah, no, I said what I meant. And maybe he didn't understand the question. Again, English is his second language, and he talks with a heavy accent. If you go and listen to the clip, I don't have the rights to play the clip here, but it kind of sounds, there's a little bit of room for interpretation. And he goes on social media today, and he says, I said, I am the worst teammate on the worst team in the MLB. And there is a little bit of room for interpretation. He could have said teammate. It sounds like he said team man. So he could have been saying team in or team man. It's a little tough to hear, and they don't have subtitles because no one quite understands exactly what he meant to say. He comes on social media and clarifies that, and you can look at it in two ways. Hey, he's trying to defend himself. I didn't say the Mets are the worst team. I'm not about to say that about my employer. Or, hey, this is actually what I said. And benefit of the doubt, I like to go with the player. Just a thing. I like to be on the player's side rather than an organization's side, if I can be. And this is kind of a toss-up of a situation. It's really a he said, she said, or really a he said with what he really meant. And if he understood the question or not, which is a whole nother thing. We will never know for sure exactly what is going on in this situation, unfortunately, because, unfortunately, we don't have the ability to go back in time and have a translator there so he can understand the question more thoroughly, or if he actually understood it thoroughly. But this is not a good look for the Mets. The Mets are already struggling, and Jorge Lopez has had a solid season for them. He's been a positive WAR player, which on a Mets team that's 11 games under 500, 16 games out of first place, is a positive thing. To come out of the bullpen, it's tough already to have a positive WAR season. He has half a WAR on the year, wins above replacement, and it's a fun little stat to look at. It's something I like to look at just when you're glancing at box scores, because it kind of shows his value there. But he's been good for the Mets all season. The Mets have 7 days to find a trade partner for him. They can cut him. He's been DFA'd, so 7 days to either cut him, demote him, or trade him. So we'll see what happens there. Like I said, this is kind of an interesting story around the MLB because nobody really knows his intent. So it's hard to kind of sit here and say, this is the objectively correct position to be. This is my opinion, because you're kind of taking his word against his word. Again, I've listened to this clip about 5 times, 5, 6, 7 times when trying to do prep for this show. And it really is just, you hear whatever you're listening for. When you're listening to it at first, the headline I read said, he says he plays for the worst team. That's what I heard. Then I started hearing reports that he said, I'm the worst teammate, and that's what I heard. And if you close your eyes and you listen to it with whatever you have in your brain, that's what you're going to hear. So it's not there's no easy way to look at this situation and tell who is in the right. Unfortunately, sometimes this is just how baseball goes. It is a little weird that he was still angry. Like I said, he got ejected in like the 6th or 7th inning of this game. This was a post-game interview. He had time to cool off. He was still very angry. And throwing your glove is not, the best possible way to handle being ejected. It's also not the end of the world. It's not something that he should get cut for. But it is something that the MLB needs to figure out, because I'm not saying they should, mandate players having translators or media having translators. It's completely up to the player whether or not they want translators. And there's some famous examples of players that don't want translators that probably could have used translators. I don't have it up in front of me, but there was a Japanese player that refused to use a translator, and he always gave fun answers to the media. Didn't always quite answer the question. But there's examples of this, and this is just an unfortunate example of something like this, with how global the sport of baseball is and how global it's continuing to grow to be, of some drawbacks of this. And you have to take his word on it. So where I'm standing on this issue is the Mets are in the wrong, because his performance doesn't deserve being cut like this. Like I said, he's played solid baseball for you. In 2024, he has a 3.76 ERA in 26 innings with 19 strikeouts. It's not all-star numbers, but it's solid numbers. It's not something that you're gonna count on at the end of games. He has a couple saves on the year, but overall, it's one of his better seasons. So there's a lot of questions with this situation, and it's not easy to tell you the exact answer. So it's something you need to figure out for you. It's something that I'd recommend going and watching the tape without having a headline in you or anything in mind. But we'll see how this develops. I think he'll find his way to another MLB roster. Like I said, he's having a solid season. It's probably his best season in the MLB so far. But we'll have to see. Anyway, in our next segment coming up, we are going to take a quick break from baseball, and we're going to go into the world of ice hockey. We're going to take a look at some of the action from the Oilers taking down the Stars to even the series at 2, as the series heads back down to Dallas in just a couple days. So we will talk about that game in just a second, coming up next on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube, absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jeremy Lapidus. If you are just tuning in, we just finished breaking down the kind of complicated situation between the Mets and Jorge Lopez that happened last night that has led to him being DFA'd or cut from the Mets. We'll see exactly how that situation plays out. I believe he'll find his way to another MLB roster by the time this season is up because he's having himself a relatively solid year. In the first segment, we talked about the wide receiver market in the NFL with Jaylen Waddle getting an extension just a couple days after Nico Collins got his own extension with the Texans. But in this segment here, we are going to talk a little bit about the world of hockey as the Stanley Cup playoffs continue to chug along. The Oilers and the Stars played Game 4 last night in Edmonton, with the Oilers dominating that game. It was the first real dominating game from either of these two teams. The Oilers win 5-2. We'll talk about that game in just a second, but before we do, remember that if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Leave a tip or donation with a message in it. That message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you have a burning question about sports, anything at all, go ahead and drop it in the comments. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. Appreciate all of you for sticking around, listening, and talking some sports with me. But yeah, it was a huge game for the Edmonton Oilers. As Kelsey is saying here in the comments, they were down 2-0 to start this game, much like the Stars were in Game 3, actually, a reverse of what happened there. The Oilers played a great game of hockey, especially in that second period, and we talked a little bit about what the Oilers needed to do to succeed. And they really checked almost all of those boxes. Their defense in the first and second period, they only allowed 14 shots through 2 periods, 7 shots a period just about. It was an incredible game by them. Stuart Skinner did his job. He made a bunch of great saves. On the other end, special teams. They won their special team. They had a shorthanded goal. Connor McDavid, and they probably should have won even they probably should have scored another goal. There was an incredibly lucky save by Jay Gottinger. He drops his stick and it kind of sits on the goal line in that first period, and the puck just rebounds off of it, leaves the net. So just a lucky save on that one. But sometimes it's better to be lucky than good. But the Oilers came out firing. Now, it didn't look like that at the beginning. They gave up a goal 50 seconds into the game, which generally is not the way that you want to play. But like Kelsey says, they were able to rebound. They tie the game by the end of the first period with 2 goals, one from Evan Bouchard, one from Ryan McLeod. And in the second period and third period, they just dominated. Really, in that second period is where they pulled ahead. I've been talking about it really this whole series, but their defense is, if they can keep the defensive intensity up, their offense can carry them through it. And they were able to keep that defensive intensity up for this entire game, especially in that second period where they did not let the Stars get an elite scoring chance. They were able to keep the puck off of the net, and they were able to get those odd man rushes. They were able to get that short-handed goal that kind of broke the spirit of the Stars, and this was a game they had to win. The Stars are a great team. There's a reason that they are the favorites to win the Stanley Cup right now, plus 160 odds. But that short-handed goal in the second period, and then a second goal less than a minute later, really kind of put the Stars to bed. There's always that, hey, we can come back when you're down 1, but that when you pile that on, that kind of like sinking feeling in your gut comes in a game like this. And this is not a game the Stars needed to win. This is a game that the Edmonton Oilers needed to win, and you kind of saw that desperation in them. So very, very, very great game for the Edmonton Oilers. Kelsey asks about the Panthers-Rangers game tonight. She says she likes the Panthers tonight. I'm not so sure. The series is heading back to New York, and I don't like to go solely on home ice advantage, but the way that there's been 3 straight overtime games in that series, and there's no reason to assume that's going to stop tonight, and an overtime game at home with the Rangers, I think I'm going to take them to win it. I do think the Panthers are a better team. there's something special. There's the Rangers have some kind of magic on their side that lets them just pull out any tight game, or seemingly pull out any tight game that they shouldn't really be winning, especially the way the Panthers played at the end of that game 4. So I'm going to pick the Rangers tonight. I do like the Panthers more, but I think the Rangers will pull this game out. I think this goes 7 anyway, with just how tight this game has been. But this series heads back to Dallas. This Oilers series heads back to Dallas, tied at 2, which is exactly where you want to be. Home ice advantage is reset. You go 1-1-1, and really anything can happen. It is a very it's very good to see how tight both of these series have been. But like I said, both of them are 2-2 heading into Game 5. And Game 5, as we all know, is very important. The stat, 80% of the time, the winner of Game 5 ends up winning the series. So Game 5 is a huge indicator. Obviously, it's much easier to win. It's much easier to win 1 than win 2 in a row, especially in playoffs. But with all of these teams being this good. So these Game 5s are going to be very, very important for every single team. So appointment watching tonight, I'm very excited talking about that Rangers series a little bit. It still is and always will come down to goaltending. Again, you have 2 of the best goalies in the game, probably the best, definitely the best goalie in the playoffs in Igor Shesterkin. I agree, Kelsey. The NHL playoffs are more fun to watch than the NBA playoffs, but that's just hockey intensity is unmatched, and maybe that's just maybe that's a little bias on my end. My hockey team's always been better than my basketball team, so maybe that's a little bit of bias on my end. But the NHL playoffs are always so much fun to watch, and that's nothing against the NBA playoffs. We love the NBA playoffs here. It's always fun in sports because it's nonstop action, especially when they have the same game on the same night. You never have to deal with commercials, really. But yeah, the intensity in the NHL playoffs is unmatched. There's a reason it's sometimes known as the best playoffs in all of sports. But yeah, and anything can happen in it. There's really no predicting anything in hockey. But yeah, talking a little bit about this Rangers series going into it tonight. Like I was saying, there's no reason to think that this isn't going to overtime, which is kind of crazy. It's not every day you can kind of sit here and feel a little confident in a prediction that it's going to go to overtime. 3 straight overtime games. I don't think we've ever had 4 straight overtime games in a series. I don't have that in front of me either, so maybe it has happened. But there is a lot to look forward to in the NHL tonight and from last night. So we'll see how it goes, and we will talk about that game in tomorrow's show and do a little more preview of the Oilers Dallas series. The one thing with Dallas that I am a little worried about is Chris Tanev got hurt. They're all-pro, they're all-star defenseman. They traded for him mid-season, and he unfortunately left the game last night with a lower body injury. He has been probably the best defenseman in the entire Stanley Cup playoffs. It's a big loss for them. What he brings to that team defensively and his ability to break the zone is something that Dallas, I mean, they have the depth to survive it, but it's a luxury that they kind of have been skating on for quite some time. We'll see how bad that injury is if he's able to play on Friday. I believe that next game is on Friday. So that's something to keep an eye on as well, the health of Chris Tanev, because especially with how great the offense is of Edmonton, not having one of your best defensemen is going to hurt. So we'll see if Dallas can rebound and if Chris Tanev is healthy enough to play. But in our next segment, we're actually going to go back to baseball. Yesterday, my audio was kind of awful, and we didn't get to talk about, and I think my show actually got cut off, but we didn't get to talk about the incorporation of the Negro League stats into the MLB. There are about 10 new all-time category leaders, and it is super exciting, and it's a great thing that it finally happened. So we're going to break down all of the historical implications of these stats being added into the MLB record books. So stick around for that. We will be right back on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. If you are just tuning in, we just did a big breakdown of all of the hockey action from last night and coming up tonight. We also talked about in the beginning couple segments, we talked about the wide receiver market explosion, and we talked about the Jorge Lopez situation with the Mets. Interesting fallout is probably going to come from that. I'm not sure exactly what's going to happen there. But in this segment here, we're going to go back to baseball, actually, and talk a little bit about something that was beyond due. Statistics from the Negro League has finally been incorporated into official MLB stats, and with that comes new all-time leaders in a lot of categories that people thought were unbreakable. Now they're even more unbreakable. John Gibson of the Grays passes some of the records that people thought would never be broken. So we'll talk about that in just a second. But before we do, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Leave a tip or donation with a message in it. That message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. Appreciate everything you do give. If you have a burning question about sports, go ahead and leave it in the comments. I will get to it as soon as I can. Anything you're wondering about, I will do my best to answer it. But like I was saying, thank you everybody for tuning in and talking some sports with me on a beautiful Thursday afternoon. Let's get into some baseball. And this is something that is really important. The MLB adds Negro League stats. And for those who are unaware, Negro League is where all the black players played before baseball was integrated, before Jackie Robinson came in 1947. So this is a league with lots of history. I was actually lucky enough. I was in Kansas City a couple weekends ago, and I was lucky enough to go and see the Negro League Museum, which is a really nice place if you ever are in town. It's like $10 to get in, and it's a really nice museum. It has a lot of really great stuff showing a lot of the history and some of the great players of the Negro League. And not only before yesterday when the MLB added the stats in, you have to go to a whole nother website and compare them. And it kind of sucks because when you talk about some of the greats, people think Babe Ruth was one of the greatest baseball players of all time. It's hard to say for sure because the league wasn't integrated. There's no way for us to know if, some guys from the Negro League would have been better. And we see guys like John Gibson, who was kind of the Babe Ruth of the Negro League, come in and break a lot of these records. It's very, very impressive. It's very, very impressive to see. But John Gibson breaks a couple of records. He takes over Ty Cobb's record of the all-time batting leader. He's the new slugging percentage leader, 718, passing Babe Ruth there. New on-base percentage leader, or on-base plus slugging leader. Again, also passing Babe Ruth. And again, the average passing Ty Cobb. There's a lot of other guys on this list as well that slide into the top 10. Oscar Charlton slides into the top 3 in average. Judd Wilson, number 5. So, we have 3 new top 5 players in averages. And some of these players were awesome. It's very cool to see them start to get some recognition outside of, in the more mainstream part of the MLB. So that's something I think has been way, it's been a little too long since that happened. Uh, it's very, very cool to see this happen. It's really great to see some of these players get the recognition. And there's always people that are going to be a little angry about stuff like this. It doesn't matter. 2 weeks from now, people are going to forget about it, and it's just something that people can look back on history books and ask, who was this guy, and people can know about them rather than it being this league that people kind of assumed was a secondary league to the MLB. And that's a normal assumption to make. Major League Baseball existed at the time. This was another league, and it was just as good. It was just and some of these players came in, and Satchel Paige comes in and is a Hall of Famer in baseball. Some of these guys that never had the chance to come in probably would have been Hall of Famers competing with some of these greats in the league. So overall, past time that this happened, and it's a great thing for the sport of baseball to recognize its history, because it is baseball history, right? It is the history of baseball that is finally getting acknowledged. So very, very past due that this happened. Anyway, in the around the rest of the sports world, there's leagues like this. So maybe this can happen in some other sports as well. But in our next segment coming up, we are going to talk about. We're going to go to the NBA. We're going to close off our show here talking about the NBA. There's been a lot of coaching stuff going on. Ty Lue gets an extension. The Wizards hire their interim coach, and the Lakers are closing in on hiring a head coach. So we will talk about all of that and more coming up next on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jeremy Lapidus. If you are just tuning in, we just talked about some of the historical implications of the Negro League stats being added in to Major League Baseball's official stat book. Awesome to see some of their great players start to get more widespread recognition. Earlier in the show, we talked about the wide receiver market, including Jaylen Waddle getting a brand new $84 million extension, making him the fourth highest paid wide receiver in the NFL. We talked a little bit about the situation with Jorge Lopez and the Mets, him getting cut after some comments he made after yesterday's game and ejection. He has been cut now, and what is kind of a translation issue. So interesting to see what might come of that. And like I said, we just finished talking about the integration of stats into the MLB. We're going to close off our show today talking about the NBA. We're going to have a full-rounded major American sports show today. We've hit all four of them, closing out with the NBA and maybe some predictions for the Mavericks and Wolves tonight. But we're going to start it off talking about some coaches in just a second. Before we do, though, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Leave a tip or donation with a message in it. That message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, go ahead and throw it in the comments. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate all of you for sticking around, listening, and talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Thursday afternoon. Once again, that link is gsmcpodcast.net. But like I was saying, we're going to close off our show today talking about NBA coaching and the NBA as a whole. Why not start off with we're going to start off with the coaches that we do know, and then we're going to transition to then we're going to transition into the Lakers, and they're the big coaching option that has not quite been found out yet. But yesterday, Ty Lue and the Clippers agreed to a 5-year extension, $70 million. That is a huge extension, a lot of money for a coach. He's one of the highest paid coaches now, and Ty Lue has a history of success. Obviously, he won with LeBron out in Cleveland. You can question how much of that was him and how much of that was LeBron, but either way, he's a coach that consistently has success, a coach that players seem to like, and I think 5 years is a lot of years. I feel like they're kind of keeping him there through the rebuild, committing to him, which is a good thing to have. Establishing a culture through a rebuild is one of the more important things, and I'm not saying the Clippers are going through a rebuild right away, but they do have a lot of older players. Paul George, I believe, is a free agent or is constantly in trade rumors this offseason. Kawhi Leonard is continuing to get more injured, continuing not to be healthy in the moments that they need him most. Russell Westbrook is not the same as he used to be, and James Harden also is kind of on the older side of things. So, taking a look at where the Clippers are, and they did lose to the Mavericks in 6 games in the first round this season. They kind of feel like they are on a downturn, and it is kind of a downturn for all of these old stars in the NBA. I'm not saying they're not going to be good, because when you have these stars, and they're still stars, these guys made all-star games this season, they're all really good still, but you can kind of start to see the decline happening with some of these guys, and it's something that I'm sure the Clippers are trying to avoid as much as possible, but they don't have too much young talent, and maybe it's time to make the trade. And I know teams don't like to blow it up, and it's not an easy decision to blow it up, but the Clippers might have to do that soon. They're going to have to face the music that they are not title contenders right now with the core that they currently have. This was probably the year that they had to do it, and maybe it's time to blow it up. And extending your coach is a good first step if you are planning to blow it up, because you know that this is the guy that's going to lead you through it, and it shows belief in him even if the going gets a little tough. Now, there's no indication that the Clippers are going to blow it up. That's just something that I would consider strongly if I was Clippers ownership and GM. On the other side of things, the other coach that we know got hired, interim coach Brian Keefe for the Washington Wizards, a team that is deep in a rebuild right now, has been deep in a rebuild for forever. My Washington Wizards hire Brian Keefe, and I think this is a good hire, right? Keeping culture around, I just talked about it in a potential rebuild, how important culture is, and this feels like a culture hire. Now, the Wizards were not a good team last year. They were, in fact, a very bad team, but hiring in-house, they kind of have started to build that culture. Now, this is not a team that's trying to be competitive right now, or if they are, is doing a very poor job of it. But they just need to get a star. That's really what they need. They're a starless. They don't have that guy. And culture is huge for role players, keeping them together as a team when you don't have that go-to guy that you can rely on in clutch situations. This is exactly what you need to have. So for the Wizards to bring back the interim coach, he did a solid job. You don't expect much out of him, but he did a solid job down there in Washington. But I'd like to see some results. Biasly as a fan, I'd like to see some stuff start to go. And it's not all on him. I think they need to draft well. They haven't had the best track record when it comes to drafting players. John Wall, Bradley Beal were probably their last two real hits in the draft. But that's a whole nother issue. You get the hand you're dealt with as a coach. The more interesting situation for coaching, at least something that I've been looking at, is the Lakers. The Lakers still don't have a coach, and we talked about it when they first fired their head coach right after the season ended for them. This feels like, hey, appease LeBron kind of coach. And it doesn't really help those rumors when seemingly your number one candidate is JJ Redick. And I like JJ Redick. I think JJ Redick has the opportunity to be a great coach in the NBA. He clearly knows what he's talking about. He's great on the media. It's fun to listen to him break down games. He has a podcast with LeBron. And I hope that's not the reason he gets hired. I hope he gets hired on merit. But he's jumping from a guy that has never coached in the NBA to a guy that is going to be coaching the Los Angeles Lakers, maybe. Now, nothing is set in stone, but I do think that he could be a good coach. I just don't know if jumping right into the saddle is a good thing for him. And also, it's a little bit suspect when LeBron James is on your team, your podcast host, and is going to be someone you're coaching, maybe. It's a lot of power to have, and we'll see what happens. But we'll talk more in depth about it when and if he does get hired. But talking about the game tonight between the Mavericks and the Timberwolves, Game 5, in Minnesota, the Timberwolves are down 3-1 in that series. And really what we're looking for in this game That's right, Kelsey. You should be the first head coach of the Lakers. I think with LeBron, you could I think you could do just as good as anybody else, honestly. Uh, but talking about the game tonight, the Minnesota Timberwolves need to do a couple things, right? First of all, they need to hold Kyrie and Luka to a combined less than 50 points, which sounds easy enough to do, but they haven't been able to do that in 3 of the 4 games this series. It is not an easy thing because Luka's probably going to go for 30 on his own, and if you can hold Kyrie under 20, I think they have a shot of winning. The other thing is they need Karl Anthony Towns and Anthony Edwards, at least one of them, to have a great shooting night. Karl Anthony Towns is a guy that is really hot and cold, and we saw him get hot in Game 4 and really power them to that victory. He needs to be able to he doesn't even need to shoot great. He just needs to shoot good. He can't be a liability out there on the court tonight on the offensive end. He can't be putting up 4 for 16. And I think the Wolves should win tonight. Like I said in an earlier show, I can't imagine the Timberwolves losing all 3 games at home. I can't imagine them losing every single game at home, and this is most likely going to be their last home game unless they can force a Game 7. They have the ability to play in a 2-game stretch. They've shown it before, a 2-game stretch better than anybody else. They did it twice against the Nuggets. They've done it, and they did it with their backs against the wall. Their backs are against the wall again. I think they will be able to pull this one out. It's going to be tight, just like every other game in this series has been decided by less than 10 points, but I do have the Wolves tonight. It's not going to be easy. We'll have to see if Lively is healthy. I don't know what his health status is heading into tonight's game. That's another big factor here. Having only Gafford, while he's playing great, he needs it's been huge having both Lively and Gafford on the floor together. Has been huge in stopping Rudy Gobert because he can't guard both of them. So we'll see what's going to happen tonight. I am on the Wolves, but thank you everybody so much for tuning in to today's episode of Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I have been your host, Jeremy Lapidus. We will be back here tomorrow to close out the week, talking about the NBA game from last night, the NBA game from tonight, the NHL game from tonight, and any other major breaking news from around the world of sports. You all have a great rest of your day, and I will see you then. Bye-bye.
Let's go. I wake up, I put up the daggers for me.